What is the scariest story that you know is 100% true? Story 1. I would call it creepy more than scary, but my mom's friend had a small house and lived alone. She noticed weird things. A batch of soup depleting faster than usual, missing eggs, damp towels in the hamper when she hadn't used any, extra dishes in the dishwasher, etc. These odd occurrences piled up over time, leaving her with an unsettled feeling she couldn't quite put her finger on. At first, she dismissed it all as forgetfulness. Maybe she was eating more than she realized, or maybe she had done laundry and forgotten about it. Life gets busy, and sometimes we lose track of the little things. But as the weeks turned into months, the strange happenings continued, and she began to doubt her own explanations. One evening, she came home to find her television turned to a channel she never watched. She swore she had left it off before leaving for work. Her cat also seemed on edge, often staring at the ceiling or acting as if it heard something moving above. Still, she chalked it up to her imagination, until one night, everything changed. It was late, and she had just gotten into bed when she heard faint thumping noises coming from her attic. At first, she thought it might be an animal, perhaps a raccoon or a squirrel. But the sounds were too deliberate, almost rhythmic, as if someone was walking or shifting things around up there. Her heart raced. Grabbing a flashlight and a kitchen knife, she decided to investigate. Climbing up into the attic, she was immediately struck by the musty smell of stale air mixed with something faintly human. Her flashlight beam swept across the space, illuminating an unsettling scene. Tucked away in the corner was a makeshift living area. A small radio, a hot plate, a sleeping bag, a pillow, and a collection of empty food wrappers and drink containers. It was clear someone had been living there, and not just for a night or two. Terrified, she quickly retreated and called the police. Officers arrived and inspected the scene. They confirmed that the attic had been used as a hidden shelter. Determined to catch the intruder, they set up surveillance around the property. It didn't take long before they spotted a man climbing a tree in the backyard, attempting to sneak into the attic window. He was promptly apprehended. The man turned out to be homeless. He had been using her attic as a secret hideout for months. During the day, he would wait for her to leave for work, then climb down and make himself at home. He would cook meals, shower, and even do laundry before retreating back to the attic when she returned. What's surprising and oddly heartwarming about this story is what happened next. After the initial shock wore off, my mom's friend began to talk to the man. She learned that he had fallen on hard times. He wasn't violent or dangerous, just desperate and trying to survive. He apologized profusely for the intrusion and explained that he hadn't meant to scare her. Instead of pressing charges, she decided to help him. She offered him a temporary place to stay, not in the attic this time, but in the guest room. She helped him clean up, gave him some clothes, and even assisted him in finding a job. Over time, they formed an unexpected friendship. He turned out to be polite and hardworking, genuinely grateful for the second chance. He stayed with her for several months, gradually getting back on his feet. Eventually, he saved enough money to rent his own apartment. Despite the bizarre and unsettling way their paths crossed, they remained in touch even after he moved out. He would occasionally visit to share updates about his life and express his gratitude. Story 2. My girlfriend's grandfather used to be a detective, and he tells a pretty terrifying story. When he was still pretty young, he got a call to an apartment building because a monster was trying to get into someone's apartment. The caller said that they had heard a gunshot, and then a while later something was pounding on their door. When they opened it, a monster was standing there and tried to get into their apartment. They kicked it out and slammed the door. The caller also said that they had heard more screams from down the hall, so the monster may have been trying to get to other people. When my girlfriend's grandfather got to the building, he found a man shambling around inside covered in blood. He got the guy turned around and realized that he had found his monster. The guy had attempted to commit suicide by putting a gun under his chin and firing upwards. However, he had screwed the angle up and blown off his jaw and part of his nose, but he was still alive and in extreme shock. He had been walking around the building knocking on doors, trying to get someone to help him, but his grisly visage had terrified everyone, so they kept slamming the door in his face. The man's injuries were catastrophic, and my girlfriend's grandfather later learned that he had likely survived the initial gunshot only because the angle of the bullet had missed vital arteries and his brain. Still, the damage was severe, and the blood loss combined with the trauma left him barely coherent. He wasn't speaking, just making guttural noises as he tried to communicate with the people he encountered. Imagine opening your door to see someone in that condition, missing half his face, drenched in blood, and flailing for help. It's not hard to understand why the residents reacted the way they did, but at the same time, it's heartbreaking to think about how desperate and alone he must have felt in those moments. The detective immediately called for paramedics, who arrived within minutes. They stabilized the man as best they could and rushed him to the hospital. My girlfriend's grandfather accompanied them, shaken but determined to get answers. Over the next few hours, the story began to unfold. The man had been struggling with severe depression and financial difficulties. He had lost his job, was estranged from his family, and had been evicted from his previous apartment. In a moment of utter despair, he had decided to end his life. But instead of dying, he had been thrust into a surreal nightmare. When he woke up after the gunshot, he found himself alive but disfigured and in unimaginable pain. Driven by a primal instinct to survive, he had stumbled into the hallway seeking help, only to be met with screams and slammed doors. His appearance, coupled with the blood and incoherent noises, had turned him into a living horror story for those who saw him. Despite the initial shock, the medical team managed to save him. He underwent multiple surgeries to reconstruct his face, though the damage was extensive and left permanent scars. The recovery process was long, and he required counseling and therapy to cope with both the physical and emotional aftermath. My girlfriend's grandfather kept tabs on his progress and even visited him a few times during his recovery. The man eventually began to rebuild his life. He found a support group and started connecting with others who had experienced traumatic events. He also became an advocate for mental health awareness, sharing his story to help others recognize the importance of reaching out for help before it's too late. Story 3. I was 10 years old when Grandma came to live with us. It was about 6 months after Granddad passed away, and I guess looking back, she must have been lonely in that big house of theirs, rattling around with only the grief and memories for company. So despite a few protests from Mum, my parents took her in. There were no protests from me. None at all. Grandma was loud and fun, and I loved her. She had an almost limitless supply of boiled sweets, and she'd always slip me a couple whenever she saw me. She was always the first to stick up for me when I got in trouble too. But it was her stories I loved best. Grandma had all kinds of stories. Stories about growing up during World War II, and stories about the things she'd get up to with her friends on the South Coast after her family had been evacuated. Sad stories, funny stories, adventure stories. But it was her scary stories that were my favorite. Grandma had lots of scary stories. She told me she dabbled in the occult when she was a teenager, trying out Ouija boards with her friends. Tarot cards, fortune-telling. All that stuff. Most of the stories I'd laugh off or forget about not long after she was done telling them. But there were a couple that really did spook me a bit. I was only 10 at the time, you have to understand. And Grandma certainly knew how to bring the stories to life. She'd shut off the lights in my room, so only the glow of the night sky shone through the curtains, and she'd shuffle in real close. Close enough so I could see the wrinkles on her face and smell the boiled sweets on her breath. Close enough so her deep blue eyes could stare straight into mine. She must have given me nightmares with a few of those tales, but now, years later, there's only one that I can still remember. Only one that stuck with me. The story about the shower and Mr. Longfingers. Grandma told me about Mr. Longfingers one night after I asked about her baths. Grandma used to love her baths. She'd spend ages in them, light candles and incense, and lie in the tub humming to herself until the water turned cold. It drove my mum crazy, but when I asked her why she loved them so much, she said it was the only place she could relax. It was the only place that was safe for her to relax. You know, people like me who are, well, more sensitive to certain things, we have to have baths, she told me seriously one night, shuffling closer on the bed. I couldn't possibly spend that long in the shower. It'd be far too risky. Grandma stared at me with those blue eyes of hers, unsmiling, and I knew it was time for one of her stories. One of the scary ones. I shivered with pleasure and pulled the covers up to my chin. Why is it risky, Grandma? She half turned to look out the window, watching me from the corner of her eye. Pausing for effect, I waited, feeling my heart rate pick up ever so slightly in my chest. Well, she said after a moment, it's only risky if you close your eyes, of course. If you close your eyes for longer than 10 seconds. What do you mean? Why? Well, do you ever play that game in the playground with your friends? The one where someone turns their back, and the others sneak up on them when they're not looking? I nodded, and Grandma nodded back. Exactly. So that's what it's like in the shower, when you have your eyes closed. That's what it's like with Mr. Longfingers. A cold itch tickled back. Who's Mr. Longfingers, Grandma? She let out a deep breath, as if she wished she hadn't said anything. Turned her head back to face mine. When she next spoke, she'd lowered her voice. No one knows exactly, Grandma whispered. Some think it's a creature that's attracted to the heat and smell we give off in there. Others think it's a demon that finds a way into our realm through the dense steam clouds. No one can say for sure, because the only ones who have actually seen Mr. Longfingers aren't ever going to be able to tell you. I pulled in a breath. Why not? Grandma shuffled closer along the bed and leaned towards me, leaving my question hanging in the air. Don't you worry about it, sweetheart. Don't worry your pretty head. As long as you remember the rules, you'll be fine. What rules? Well, when you're in the shower, you try not to close your eyes for too long. 5 seconds is fine, and 10 is just about okay too. But any longer than that, yeah, then what? Well, any longer than that, and you may just start to feel something in the room with you. Something watching. And if you ever go longer than 15 seconds, that's when you might start to hear a noise, too. Hear what? The soft tap 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 of fingers on glass. Fingers drumming against the glass door of the shower. If you do ever hear that noise, God forbid, will you make me a promise? What, Grandma? Promise me you'll never open your eyes. I barely slept that night. Hardly at all. I'd close my eyes and try to relax, but every time I did I'd imagine a face pressed against my bedroom window, staring in at me. And when I did finally get to sleep, I had nightmares. Bad ones. I had them all week, in fact. Dreams about disembodied eyes watching me in the dark, and long fingers reaching out to touch my exposed skin. It wasn't any better when I was awake, either. Not really. The shower was the worst. That's when Grandma's story really got to me. I'd never thought about it before, but suddenly I had trouble shutting my eyes in there. I'd be standing beneath the beating water, shampoo running down my face, and as soon as I squinted my eyelids closed I'd hear Grandma's words running through my head. 5 seconds is fine, and 10 is just about okay too. But any longer than that, I'd rub my hair fast, feeling the shampoo dripping off my chin, and as soon as I'd counted past 5 seconds I'd feel it. A sort of pressure. Not a feeling of being watched, exactly, but something close to that. I'd run my fingers faster and faster through my hair, frantically trying to get the suds out, and the ready blackness behind my closed eyes coupled with the rush of water in my ears would feel like a held breath, like the silence before a scream. The seconds would race through my mind, and I'd be so desperate to open my eyes again that I'd sometimes do it before my hair was rinsed fully clean, and my eyes would sting with shampoo. But before I shut them again, I'd always be sure to peer out through the steamed glass door of the shower cubicle, just to make sure I was still alone. Asterisk. It wasn't long before Mum realized something was up. She heard me crying out in my sleep one night, and came in to comfort me. Asked me what the matter was, and it all came out. I told her about Grandma's stories, and about Mr. Longfingers. She got this look on her face when I was telling her like she used to get with me when I'd made her really mad. This wide-eyed, angry look. Only this time she wasn't angry with me. She was angry with Grandma. My parents' room was next to mine, and sometimes, if I pressed my ear against the wall, I could hear them talking in there. Soft whispers. That night, though, after Mum was satisfied I wasn't scared anymore, and she'd gone back to her room, the whispers weren't soft at all. Oh no! I heard Mum hissing to Dad about Grandma. About the story she'd told me. Mum's voice floated through the wall, sharp and crisp. You know what your fucking mother said to him now, don't you, Simon? Dad's response was an unintelligible mutter. She's told him there's a monster that'll get him if he shuts his eyes in the shower. A monster. The poor kid's been having nightmares about it all week. Seriously, Simon, you'd better say something to her tomorrow morning, first thing. Or I will. Grandma came to visit me in my room the following night. That time, as she perched on the end of my bed, there were no stories. Nothing like that. Grandma just sat there and stared down at me, her blue eyes wide and sad. The light from the moon outside my window lit up her wrinkled face. You know I'd never let anything bad happen to you, don't you? She said after a moment. I nodded my head. I know, Grandma. You know I wouldn't let you come to any harm? I nodded again. Okay, good. That's good. She looked away from me for a moment, out the window. You know, the things I tell you in the evening are meant to help you, sweetheart. They're meant to toughen you up a bit. Protect you. She paused and shook her head. But maybe your mum's right. Maybe I went too far this time. She looked down at me and smiled. But even then, even though I was only 10 years old, I could tell it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll tell you what," Grandma said. "You know what I told you about Mr. Long Fingers and the shower? Well, I'm going to make sure you're safe. I'll scare the bastard off, how about that? It won't come back in a hurry if it has to face me." I stared up at Grandma, watching her face glow in the moonlight, watching her smile down at me. I nodded my head once. Asterisk. I was the one who found her. I don't know when exactly it happened, but I'd guess it was about a week after we had that talk in my room. A week after she told me she wouldn't let me come to any harm. I woke early that morning from a bad dream to a heavy thumping sound. I sat bolt upright in bed. My room was quiet around me, and I couldn't hear anything from the wall that joined my parents' room, either. But the house wasn't entirely silent. Floating down the hall, muffled by my closed door, I could hear the sound of rushing water, the noise of the shower. I leapt out of bed and ran down the upstairs hallway, heart already pounding in my chest. As soon as I reached the closed bathroom door, I started banging on it. A deep terror was welling up inside me like cold water from a well, something I couldn't place, and I kept banging and shouting "Grandma" over and over again, even though she didn't respond. Off to my right I was dimly aware of voices from my parents' room, the sleepy shuffle of footsteps. But before they had a chance to make it out onto the landing, I'd lifted my hand to test out the door handle, more out of instinct than because I thought it might actually open. But the door wasn't locked. I kept banging with my free hand, and it swung suddenly inwards, bringing me face to face with a wall of steam. Heat struck my skin. I squinted my eyes against the damp fog and peered into the bathroom. And before Dad pushed me to one side, before everything around me descended into shouting and tears and chaos, I saw her. I saw Grandma. She was lying naked on the floor in the shower cubicle, the water beating down around her, blue eyes bulging from her face. One hand was curled against her chest, like a dead bird, while the other trailed against the glass of the shower cubicle, the flailing finger marks she'd carved through the steam still clear and fresh. Asterisk. It was a heart attack that killed her. That's what my dad told me. He said Grandma was old, and the thing had struck her quickly and suddenly. She would have died fast and without pain, Dad said. She wouldn't have suffered. I knew better, though. Even as a 10-year-old kid, I knew better. And years later, writing this as an adult, I still know better. I also know my wife and kids resent me for refusing to have a shower in the house, for insisting everyone take baths. They pretend it's okay, and they humor me, but I can tell they don't really understand it. Not at all. My wife thinks she does. She thinks I still carry the trauma of seeing my grandmother dying in front of me when I was little. I guess she's right, in a way, but she doesn't know the full truth. Nobody does, and no one would believe me even if I told them. No one would believe me if I said the reason I don't take showers, the reason I haven't had one since I was 10 years old, isn't because I'm scarred from the sight of a dead body. It's because all those years ago, when I crept back into the still hot bathroom after the paramedics had taken Grandma's body downstairs, I made sure to check the marks her fingers had carved through the steamed glass of the shower cubicle. Story 4. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side, the real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. Anyway, I had been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you just suddenly become really tired, out of nowhere? Well, yeah, that happened to me. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull up, and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass, behind some bushes, to try and hide my car from anybody else who was going to come past. The roads weren't empty. I came across another car every few minutes or so. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22, and then fell asleep. Some time later, I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rearview mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was the damn hook killer. You know, the one that scratched that couple's car and then slaughtered the guy when he got out to investigate? Fuck that, I thought to myself, so I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a fucking car, parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door opened. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rear view mirror. I didn't see anything, and all of a sudden, this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like, hey you, get the fuck out of your car. Now, I noped the fuck out of there and sped off. I never saw the guy again. Moral of the story? Don't fucking sleep on the side of a deserted road. Story 5. A few summers ago, I went for a bike ride around midnight with a friend. We went our separate ways at the end of the evening, and I had about 2 blocks to ride back by myself. Because of construction, I had to ride on the sidewalk, but the streets were dead, but it wasn't a problem until right where I was about to turn left onto my street. There was this man walking by himself, maybe 40s, a little scruffy but not homeless. The sidewalk was narrow, and I didn't want to freak him out, so when I got about 6 feet behind him I said, hey, behind you. And he turned around and gave me this super angry look. I turned down my street, and he started to follow me, literally screaming about how I was a fucking cunt, and he was going to kill me and all that. I live right off the corner, and I didn't want him to figure that out, so I decided to do another loop around the block. That's not the scary part. The scary part is that when I looped back around and looked down the street, I saw him standing on my fucking front stoop, staring out at the street like the motherfucker knew I lived there. He saw me ride by again, but he didn't say anything. I ended up going back to the friends, but my bike got stolen from the alleyway by the house 2 days later. Edit. The guy in question was definitely not actually homeless. We have a large population of mentally ill in that area, unfortunately, downtown of a medium-sized city. So if I didn't think the sidewalk was too narrow to pass otherwise, I wouldn't have disturbed him. Half the scary part was that he looked pretty much completely normal for my area. That being said, I ended up texting my mom, and she made the decision not to notify law enforcement until my bike was stolen. Story 6. This is not supernatural creepy, but is one of the more disturbing and surreal experiences of my life. One early morning a few short years ago, I am walking to my bus stop and eating a banana. It is dark, misty, around 5 a.m., and I am internally debating something trivial, like if I want my daily Starbucks before or after the commute. As I approach the dimly lit corner on my street, a tall man in a black mask steps out of the dark alleyway to my left. Sleepy and disoriented, I barely acknowledge him. When he shouts, "Put down your fucking purse," and points his gun to my head, things start to click. The man says, "Put down your bags," and I tell him, Okay, I'm putting them down over here." He orders me to walk over to him, toward the alley, and get down on the fucking ground, and I agree I'm coming, okay. My heart is beating 1,000,000 miles a minute, and my hands still smell sticky with banana. I know I need to get away. I don't know why, but my mouth won't stop working. Look, see, I'm on the ground. My stuff is over there. Please just take my stuff, but he doesn't like it. Shut the fuck up, okay? He gets on top of me and puts the gun to my head. At this point, I should mention the fact that I'm on my way to coach a high school practice, and I'm dressed like a dude. Huge baggy pants, hat, jacket. If not for my telltale voice, I'd look like a prepubescent 90s rap star. Anyway, as the guy gets on top of me, gun to my head, he looks at me and pauses. I can't tell you why I know this, but I swear that at this moment, it clicks for him that I'm a woman. He gets off of me, stands up, and points to the dark alley. Come with me. My stomach hurts. I remember that there have been a recent rash of sexual assaults in my neighborhood, during the daytime no less. When the man points down that dirty alleyway, my internal voice speaks the fuck up. Says voice number 1, "There was no way in hell you are going to go down there without a fight." "But he has a gun, you dipshit," replies voice number 2. "Fucking follow me," the real voice, his voice, hollers. So I do what I do best, I talk. "I'm coming, I'm following you." I call, and the man makes a crucial mistake, he believes me. I take 1-2 tiny steps backwards toward the sidewalk, and he turns his body and his gun toward the alley. This is my moment. I take a deep breath, tuck my head down in case he starts shooting, and start sprinting away. I hear a voice screaming in a high-pitched wail before I realize that it's mine. After running 6 or 7 blocks, I head back to my apartment, hoping he's not there to see where I lived. The police check out the alleyway an hour later, but the potential attacker is long gone. The only evidence of the encounter is my banana peel browning in the alleyway and the adrenaline rush that I couldn't shake for days. I would be lying if I said that if that experience doesn't bother me still, but I'm so fortunate to mainly be haunted by the what-ifs and not the what-dids. Story 7. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. It starts at one side of the room, casually walks to the other and stops. This will happen maybe twice a night. I didn't start hearing it until I was about 14, when my grandparents made me start sleeping in a different room on the first floor because they starting sleeping in separate bedrooms. Blah blah blah, regardless both of their rooms are also on the first floor. For a little backstory, I've always been afraid of the upstairs at their house. I don't know why, but it's always freaked me out, and I refuse to ever go up there alone. I'm 23 now, still won't go up alone. There's one room specifically though. It's a long, narrow bedroom. When you open the door, there are closets on your left and right, a bed placed roughly in the middle of the room, and a window on the far side opposite the door. I was told growing up by my grandparents that the sons of the previous owner claimed to see a gorilla come out of the closet at night, dance around the room, and go back into the closet. I thought nothing of this story until I had to start sleeping in the other room. The room located directly below the scary room upstairs. So we all go to bed. All the lights in the house are off, and I'm still awake, lying on the bed. Then I heard it. Thump, 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 starting at one end of the room upstairs. It got closer to me, passed right above me, and continued to the end of the room, where it stopped. I'm wide awake, terrified out of my mind. It was no question to me that I had heard footsteps. I knew that slow, casual pace. I was freaked out and went to my grandpa's room. I told him what I heard. He told me that the house is old and it creaks. But he turned the dining room light on for me, so I felt a little safer. I tried going back to sleep. Then it started again, this time from where it ended the first time, by the window upstairs. It walks over me again and stops when it reached the door. I thought it was over until 5 seconds later when I heard it coming down the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, silence as it reached the landing. Then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And silence again as it reached the first floor. I was frozen in shock. Whatever it was on my floor of the house, and sadly unaffected by the dining room light. I was staring at the doorway to my room. The dining room light was shining in, and my vision began to distort. I felt dizzy with fear, so I pulled the blankets over my head and suddenly heard a scratching sound from inside my room. I knew exactly where it was coming from too, my grandpa's gun case. It was a very obvious sound, scratching on the wood. Long scratches down the front of the gun case door. I could even hear the door ever so slightly tapping against the frame as each scratch began. I tried to scream and I couldn't. I took a second to take a deep breath and let out a loud scream. In seconds my grandpa had made it to my room and I was relieved. Needless to say, he still didn't believe me, so I did what any normal person would do. I draped a sheet over the side of the bed and slept underneath it. I wrapped myself tight in a comforter, put on headphones, and turned my back to the door. There could be a party of ghosts in my room, and I wouldn't even know. The next morning, my grandpa told my grandma about what happened the night before. She said, "Oh, that's silly. You know, your cousin woke me up the last time she stayed here. She came in my room saying, 'I hear footsteps.' I slept under the bed for the rest of my week stay with them. I've stayed there countless times since that happened, and I hear the footsteps every time. I sleep on top of the bed now, but keep my back to the door and sleep with headphones on. I haven't heard it come down the stairs since that first night. But if it does, I don't want to know." Story 8. True story time. I was about 4 or 5 years old, and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of a hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the first floor, and I remember that it was in the middle of the summer, and my mom had a window open her room, which was directly behind the bed, above the headboard. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night and remember sitting up and seeing that our cat was sitting in the door frame of my mom's room. Her door was open, and you could partially see into my bedroom. This was strange because our cat was typically always in bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mom and wake her up. In the 3/4 seconds it took her to wake up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back up in the door frame, and there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother proceeded to pick me up and literally throw me out of the screen window. Again, we were on the first floor, and it was maybe a 3-foot drop to the ground. She quickly followed, and we were able to start screaming for help, and someone called 911. The police came but didn't see any signs of forced entry. Only that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe the man must have exited that way. The strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night, with the deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened up our water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. Story 9. A terrifying but true story I experienced when I was 12. I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and didn't know anyone in the area, except for the family my dad was friends with. Single mom with 3 kids. Luckily, there was a girl a couple years older than me, 12 at the time I met her, and we got to know each other a little over a couple years. We weren't close, but ended up having the same friends. One night my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because my friend's mom was at work, which is where this gets terrifying and sad. Her mother had been helping this one lady through her work and got to know her fairly well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. The night Rob was hanging out with my friend, they got a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just their mom. She knocks a certain way when coming in, and answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there, and he took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. It wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she figured out through talking to her sister where her family lived and her mom's working schedule. She came in, and this is where I don't know details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbors to call the police. The lady brutally murdered my friend a week from Christmas, decapitated her and left her body, naked in a bathtub, hit her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. I remember the shock and horror that swept through the community. The news spread quickly, and no one could believe something so gruesome had happened right in our neighborhood. For weeks, people locked their doors, kept their lights on at night, and checked over their shoulders. The police presence in the area increased, but it didn't bring back the sense of safety we had lost. The investigation into the woman revealed a long history of untreated mental illness and violent tendencies. She had been released from the institution with minimal follow-up care, and the lack of supervision proved to be catastrophic. Her obsession with my friend's family seemed to have built up over time, fed by delusions and paranoia. In her twisted mind, she believed harming my friend was some kind of retribution or act of control. I often think about Rob and what he must have felt afterward: guilt, fear, helplessness. He ran to save himself, but what happened after he left is something that likely haunted him for years. He never talked about it much, at least not to me, but his demeanor changed. He became quieter, more withdrawn. We drifted apart not long after. My friend's younger brother, who had the courage to run for help, struggled too. I can't even imagine the trauma he carried, having witnessed what he did and escaping with his life. I heard later that he and his mom moved away shortly after the funeral, unable to stay in the home where everything happened. I always hoped they found some kind of peace, but I never found out for sure. For me, it was a loss of innocence. At 12 years old, I had to confront the fact that the world wasn't as safe as I thought it was. The tragedy left me with nightmares and a lingering fear of being home alone. I would double-check locks and avoid answering the door unless I was absolutely sure who was on the other side. It's a fear that stuck with me, even into adulthood. The memory of my friend still hits hard during the holidays. That empty spot where she should have been, celebrating Christmas with her family, is something I can't forget. It made me appreciate the time I had with loved ones more, but it also left a permanent scar. Every year, I light a candle for her and say a silent prayer, hoping she found peace wherever she is now. Over the years, I tried to learn more about what happened to the woman who did this. She was arrested and declared unfit for trial, sent back to a psychiatric facility indefinitely. While it brought some relief knowing she wouldn't hurt anyone else, it didn't erase the fear and anger that lingered. How could someone so dangerous be released without proper supervision? It made me question the system and its failures. I also became more aware of mental health issues and the importance of treatment. It's tragic to think that maybe, with the right care and attention, the woman's actions could have been prevented. But at the same time, it doesn't excuse what she did. The damage was already done, and my friend's life was stolen in the most horrific way. Story 10. Alrighty, this is the late 80s/early 90s. I was around 6 to 7 years old. I am at home with my sister, who was 14 to 15 at the time. We grew up in a small Texas town. Everyone knows everybody. We are home alone this particular night, and my folks let my sister babysit me frequently. We always got along due to our age gap. Anyway, it is about 8 p.m. in the winter. Deserts get pretty damn cold. So it is dark, and we are in the common room since that is where the TV was. Watching 60 Minutes or 48 Hours or Hard Copy or some shit. Those one-hour news pieces on CBS that chronicle large crimes in depth. Trafficking, murders, kidnappings, and the like. Basically a gritty Lifetime special. This one was a typical story. Guy next door that was quiet went on a rampage in his next-door neighbor's house, mutilating them and kidnapping their young daughter. Well, the thing about our house common room is the door leading to the backyard was a large glass door on a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows. Nothing but blackness beyond it unless you have the backlight on. We did not. The front door is on the other side of the room with a small entryway. This is a solid door, so you cannot see what is beyond it, with a glass storm door on the outside of it. About 45 minutes into the show, they are talking about the ongoing manhunt for this crazy guy, and bam bam bam, front door bangs like crazy. We jump the fuck up and scream like banshees. Dead silence now. The only lights on in the house are the kitchen down the hall from the common room we were in and the light from the TV. We start thinking something on the porch. We had some planters and a rocking chair out there, had simply blown against the door. This was West Texas, crazy strong winds out that way. Well, a minute or two of silence, and us holding each other post-adrenaline overdose passes. Just when we are about to declare everything is safe, we hear the storm door on the outside of our front door close. Fuck. Someone had to have opened that door to be able to bang on the front door like that. Shit. We are both frozen in the middle of the room on the floor, where we had been watching TV. My sister crawls over to the TV and turns it off. It was an old TV, so you had to turn that metal dial to switch it off, which it does with a mildly loud thunk. Now it is just us in a room dimly lit by the kitchen light down the hall. I do not remember how much time passed with my frozen, and my sister still crouched by the now off TV, but we kept making eye contact, then looking at the front door. I remember this part vividly. I am on my knees sitting on my feet, and I turn around to look at the back wall of windows and glass door. We hear and I see the back door knob turn. It was locked on the knob but not deadbolt. It rattles slightly as if someone is gently trying the handle. Neither of us make a sound, just held breath. Then bam 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 loud, as all hell someone is trying to force the door open, just jerking it back and forth. The whole wall of windows is vibrating violently, and I can see with each jerk of the door how my slight reflection gets fuzzy, then clear, then fuzzy. My sister flips her shit and screams bloody murder. I am still frozen on the floor. She gets up and basically drags me into her bedroom, slams the door, throws her mattress and anything she can in front of her door. Thankfully, she had remembered the phone, one of those ungodly heavy beige plastic long metal antenna portable phones. We still had to direct dial the sheriff there, and in her panic, didn't remember the number. She just hit redial on the phone. It was one of her friends, and she tells them in broken gasps that someone is trying to get into our house, and needs to get there right fucking now. The profanity sticks out here more than anything else, who knows, young brain. I am curled up on the floor and cannot stop shaking. We don't hear anything else until we see the headlights of my sister's friend and her parents driving up to the house. We never did find out who was at the door or why. There were no signs of anything happening, but a couple of scuff marks on the bottom of the back door that we could not remember if they were there beforehand or not. Nothing like that has happened to me or her since, but for damn sure we never forget to lock a door after that.